Yeah, there it is. Okay, we'll just to remind people there are refreshments over there. And whoever comes in late, too bad. Hey, everybody. I'm Mike Schachter, president of the Carolina Nature Coalition. Well, we're coming off of Earth Day, and some of you might have seen us at the Steward of the Earth celebration on Saturday. That's when Earth Day was celebrated here in New Bern. Today, we will be celebrating the day with our speaker from Sound Rivers. Some of you might recall that we had Clay Barber from Sound Rivers here to speak on rain gardens about 2 years ago, as well as he led us to see some rain gardens around the area here. It was fantastic. Maybe we'll have another tour this summer. The result of that presentation, Tom tried to apply some, that's Tom Shoup, who is our technical person, who was going to introduce, but he's working on the technical part. So he asked me to do it. He actually introduced some of the things on water runoff in his yard, and he's happy to report that his plants are doing fantastic. All right. Today we have the executive director of Sound Rivers with us, Heather Deck, who has stepped in for Emily Fritz, who could not join us today because of family obligations. Heather joined the staff of Sound Rivers a long time ago, in July 2003. And over the years has led its advocacy, volunteer, and educational programs. With 20 years of experience with the Pamlico Tar-River Keeper and as executive director, she is a sought-after expert on river environmental issues. She has been appointed to numerous commissions, working with groups related to North Carolina's water policy and management of the watershed, including the state's Sedimentation Control Commission for 6 years. Heather has a master's degree in environmental management from the Nicholas School of Environment at Duke University, where her concentration was in water and air resources, with an emphasis on water quality and wetland ecosystems. So without further ado, Heather Deck.
Put my timer here. Thank you. It's good to be here with you all, and if you feel inclined to move forward. My father was a Methodist minister, and he was always trying to get people to come from the back. So we can make this pretty, informal. I know. Talk about some things, and always happy to answer questions as you have them. So don't hesitate to interrupt. It's not a problem. I prefer a conversation when we have presentations, to hear what's on your mind and answer questions. But tonight, happy to be here. Emily sends her regards. She had a family emergency, so she couldn't make it. I put my readers on so I can see what I'm doing here. So is the slideshow going to present to you, Tom? Okay. There it goes. Very magic-like. And Samantha Kropp, our Neuse River keeper, who I think spoke to the group recently too, sends her regards. She's in the area doing some work and pollution investigation work, and so she was sorry to be able to miss to be here tonight. But so I thought we're going to talk a little bit about Sound Rivers, the organization. I think some of you are already fairly familiar. How many really know Sound Rivers pretty well? About half. How many are kind of new to kind of understanding the organization? Okay. Well, we'll do a little overview of that. And then I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Neuse River and answering the question, which is really an impossible question, but the state of the Neuse. How is the Neuse River? It's a kind of a mixed answer. It's a little bit of a gray answer, but we'll dig into that a little bit today, and hopefully you'll leave with some new information, some understanding of the science and what's going on in the river system that I know you all care about very much. Usually before I do a talk, I like to start with this slide. I always think it's kind of neat. This is a website I'm happy to share out to Michael, but it's a website where you can go and you can plug in any address across the country, your home address, anything else, and you can explore the lands where you are today, where you live, and whose native territory, in history, where we are. So where we are today in the Unitarian Church was actually kind of an overlap of the Lumbee and the Nuseaq native tribes of this region. And I always like to point this out. It's a great resource. You can go, you can click on the links, and then you can learn a little bit more about the history of those native tribes that called this part of Eastern North Carolina home. So Sound Rivers, we are actually a 43-year-old organization. Back in 1980, the Neuse River Foundation was founded mainly by residents here in the Craven County area. Concerns over water quality. There was lots of fish kills and algal blooms. The river just didn't seem healthy. A year later, in Beaufort County, residents got together and created the Pamlico River Foundation. And those two organizations are two of the oldest conservation organizations in the state. And then in 2015, the members of both and the board of directors decided that it made sense for those two entities to combine as one, and they created Sound Rivers. Same mission, same organizations, same history, same focus, one unit now working in tandem together to protect the Neuse and the Tar-Pamlico. Makes a lot of sense. A lot of our geography shares. We share Pitt County. We share all parts of all of these counties. One side of the line, a raindrop flows to the Tar-Pam, and one side of the line, the raindrop flows to the Neuse. So very similar issues. And so we're now, almost 9 years into the merger as an organization. And I think we're stronger than ever. We have now 9 staff. We have 3 offices doing work from the upper parts of the watershed all the way down into the coast. And this is our team that we have right now. Up in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see Samantha Kropp is our Neuse River keeper. Beside her is Katie Zimmerman. She's our Pamlico River keeper. And their roles are really to be out in the community, responding to pollution concerns, investigating pollution, finding sources, figuring out solutions. And Samantha is also our director of advocacy. So she's really thinking of the strategies of what issues do we need to work on? How do we solve these issues through good policy, through good local ordinances and things like that. Below those two is Taylor Register, who works just down the street. Yeah. And Taylor, I don't know if she's spoken to you, but she's also wonderful. She's our water quality specialist. So she's our scientist. She makes sure everything that we do is great integrity to the science, and digs into those questions that our Riverkeeper team has. Up in the upper right, there's Emily Fritz, who was going to be here with you tonight. She's our volunteer coordinator. She is wonderful. She loves working with people. So as we talk about some of the opportunities to plug in with the work that we do and volunteer, she's your contact. And she lives actually down a little way down near Oriental. Clay Barber, who I know you guys got to talk to, is our program director. He is very excited about stormwater at all times, but he also runs our water trail, manages our water trail on the Tar-Pamlico. We have a series of camping platforms along the entire Tar down into the Pamlico in Washington. And those are available for people to rent and to use. And so he oversees the management and makes sure those are up to snuff, and after a storm gets them cleaned up and things like that. The rest of the group, we have communications and development team, and then, down at the bottom is our admin team there. But our program team are most of those folks that I mentioned up at the top. So a little bit about the watersheds. Amazingly enough, which of course this spoils it here, but the Tar-Pam and the Neuse together are almost a quarter of the state. If you can think of the whole state of North Carolina, those two watersheds alone are 23% of the state. About 2.5 million people live just in these two watersheds, rely on clean water for their homes, for their livelihood as well. And so, as you know, the Neuse is the widest river in the world. It's 6 miles wide before it dumps into the estuary. The Pamlico is not far behind it, at like about 5 miles. So just some amazing environment between these two river systems that start in the Piedmont and then transition into the coastal plain. And the other kind of neat thing that's also helpful for the work that we do is that there's only 4 river basins really in the state that are contained entirely within the state. In other words, we don't share, our water doesn't start in Virginia, doesn't end in South Carolina. So from a management standpoint, it's really, we only have ourselves to blame in North Carolina, right? If we're not doing what we need to do, it's basically, North Carolina policy. And so it does make it at least somewhat simpler as we think about how we manage these rivers. But tonight we're going to talk about the Neuse. And this is kind of just a, over a view. It's different color green, but the watershed goes all the way down east of New Bern. The points that are on there, some of the major towns, it's also some of the places, the little red dots are some of the key places where the state monitors the river water quality. And you'll see a little bit of data when I dig into the science later. I'm a science nerd. I love science. I will make you hopefully love it if you don't love it by the end of the night, but we'll dig a little bit into some of the water quality science as well. But about 1.5 million people, 22 county area, all our parts of 22 counties are in this, about 1.5 million. Some of the major tributaries that flow into the Neuse up in the Triangle are the Neuse River and the Flat. There's Crabtree Creek. If you've ever been to Crabtree Mall in Raleigh, that creek. Walnut Creek is in southeast Raleigh. There's the Little River, and then we get to Contentia, and then of course the Trent River is one of the other major kind of river systems that flows out of the south back into the Neuse River at New Bern. So we're going to talk a little bit about the downside, the problems that the river is facing at this time, and I'll dig in just a little bit, kind of just scratch the surface of some of the issues that we as an organization are tracking. And you kind of see the laundry list there and some of the issues, but one of the main ones that I know Samantha has been working on a lot, especially in the Triangle, is basically over, last 20 years, from 2000 to 2019, there's been about 17 to 18% growth and development in the watershed. In other words, we've changed farmlands or forest lands, grasslands from those into some sort of development, homes, businesses, shopping centers. But with that can come sediment pollution. And these are pictures actually up in Durham County. There's a couple of tributaries up there. There's a lot of development, a lot of housing development. The construction companies are not doing a great job of keeping the sediment on site as they're developing them and cutting down trees to put those in. And so, as Samantha says, the streams are kind of looking like tomato soup, which they're not supposed to. And you can see from the one picture there on the right that there's a tributary on the right, and then there's another small one that enters in. And you can just see the difference in color of one that's impacted by development and one that is not. And so these are issues that we're digging into. And I think in part, it's partly the type of soils and how they run off. It's also in part, really trying to convince the local jurisdictions to do more through ordinance or other regulations to try to not to pollute these creeks. Those creeks in particular go into Falls Lake. And if you live in Raleigh or know people in Raleigh, that's important because that's where they get their drinking water. So that's the type of water right now that's kind of flowing into the drinking water source of Raleigh. One that you all are familiar with, fish kills, a regular occurrence in the summer months. In fact, we just got a call Saturday about some fish that were bellying up in Fairfield Harbor area. Good news is Samantha did go out there today, and water quality kind of looks like it's normal again and didn't see any evidence of a big fish kill. But it's a little early, but we're already seeing some symptoms out there of the river water. It's usually low oxygen, so you can get lots of pulses of nutrients that come into the waterway with sun, with heat. You have algae that then say, thank you for that wonderful nutrient salad, and I'm going to just grow and grow and grow. As those algae grow and as they die, they sink to the bottom. When they decompose, microbes and other things use oxygen as they decompose that algae, and that can cause drops in oxygen. The other interesting thing about these rivers, the Neuse and the Tar-Pamlico, is that, salt water is denser. Fresh water is less dense. So you have fresh water coming in from upstream. You have salt water coming in from the ocean. Sometimes they don't mix. And so there's actually this layer of this denser salt water at the bottom that then is where the algae are being decomposed, where all the dead water is. And it just, at the bottom, it's just dead water, zero oxygen. Fish cannot live in zero oxygen water. But on Friday, we had a big wind, right? And so that mixes the top and the bottom. It brings up that dead water up to the top. And that's why we were seeing small menhaden and others just the oxygen bottomed out. And so they had a hard time breathing. And so that's just some of the dynamics of how we get these fish kills across the summer. I think one of the things that's concerned me is over the 27 years I've been working on these coastal rivers is the water temperature these days in the summer is just up and up and up and up. I mean, we're getting extremely high temperature waters, which is also the higher temperature water you have, the less amount of oxygen just physically can be in the water. That's just physics. That's got nothing to do with pollution. That's just physics. And so that's another impact of climate change that I think we're going to continue to see impacts as we continue in the future. If you were to take home one key message from tonight, these next few slides, I think, are going to be it. For those of you that live here, that love to see a clean and healthy river, that are concerned about flooding, Florence was a huge hit. Matthew was a huge hit before that. We're going to have more storms in the future. Wetlands are one of those things that help abate a little bit of those flooding and extreme storms and some of the other just normal rainfalls that we get. An acre of wetland can absorb 1.5 million gallons of water. I mean, they're just really meant to be sponges and soak those up. But last summer, there was a legal case that got up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and it was called the Sackett decision. And the Supreme Court in that decision essentially rolled back areas of wetlands from federal protections. If you have a wetland, wetlands are wetlands. They're wet, types of soil, there's a type of plant. And so they might not necessarily be wet. You might not get your feet wet and it might be a wetland. It depends on 3 different factors. But, around here we have lots of kind of, wetlands that are along the river. We have depressional areas. We have forested types of wetlands. A wetland is a wetland. There's a federal law called the Clean Water Act that was passed under the Nixon administration in the 70s. And that was always said that wetlands are important. They're important for water quality. We're going to protect them. And it didn't mean that wetlands weren't ever filled or turned into a house or something else. It just meant that there was a regulatory structure for that. Someone actually had to apply for a permit. They had to say that they were avoiding as much wetland as they can. If they impacted a wetland, they had to offset it by paying to have another wetland built somewhere else or doing something so that we had a no net loss of wetlands. That was the goal. Well, the Supreme Court decision actually basically shrunk the areas of wetlands, shrunk the amount of wetlands that are actually covered under federal law, meaning about what we estimate now is about 3 million acres of wetlands. Most of those in eastern North Carolina have lost protections. In other words, someone could go drain them, fill them, build a house on them. There's no permit required. There's no offset required, nothing. Now, fortunately, in the state of North Carolina, it's actually in our Constitution that wetlands are important and we should protect them. We had laws in North Carolina that actually protected certain types of wetlands. Unfortunately, after the Sackett decision, the General Assembly then passed through the Farm Act, tying state wetland protections to the federal decision. So we lost state protections for wetlands. And I think the biggest concern that we have is that we cannot keep these rivers healthy. We cannot keep, communities better protected from flooding and resiliency if we can't protect wetlands and continue with this sort of no net loss of wetlands. And so it's about, I think they're estimating 3.5. It's impossible to know for sure exactly how many wetlands have lost because the Supreme Court decision was not well defined. They used terms like continuous or I'm trying to think of the other term, Michael, that they had used, indistinguishable. So they use terms that they didn't define. And when legal cases use terms that they don't define, it usually spawns more legal cases. But the best estimate that we've come up with is actually from the Environmental Defense Fund. And that's the image that you're seeing up there. The darker red kind of polygon is the Tar-Pamlico Basin. The one right below it in the black is the Neuse River Basin. But what those numbers are, you can't really see the numbers. They're basically saying 67 to 72% of the wetlands they estimate that are remaining, that are still left, are no longer protected from development, from filling, from everything else. That doesn't mean that we can't do that. It just means that federal protection, that regulatory structure is gone. Importance of wetlands. There are many reasons we need to protect wetlands, but wildlife and fisheries. They help clean our water. Think of them as sort of the kidneys on the landscape. And as water and things go through, the sediments, the plants, and other things filter out pollutants. They do, again, absorb a lot of water and protect ourselves from extreme flooding. I think if you remember Katrina, after Katrina down and the Gulf Coast, they talked a lot about sort of the loss of some of those wetlands along the Gulf Coast and what that meant then for the communities back in behind. And there's been a lot of effort to try to restore those to protect, those communities from future storms. And then for us to get, I live in Beaufort County, my water comes from the Castle Hayne, just like here in New Bern. Wetlands are very important of recharging groundwater as well. So for a drinking water supply. If you go to our website, there's some information on the table over there. We have a current action alert. It's just some language. This is just, it's an opportunity and encouragement to reach out to your elected official at the state level. I think here it's Senator Perry, and maybe Steve Tyson on the representative side is one of them. And actually, Senator Perry, has done some good things related to wetland and funding for wetland resiliency work. They need to hear from you. They need to hear that this is important for my community. And so I just encourage you to look at that when you can. I'm just going to go through a little bit of science, and then I'm going to go into our programs, which is what Emily would have wanted to really highlight about some ways to be involved. But I wanted to make sure that I touched on this for the state of the Neuse, and then I'm happy to answer, the questions that you all have. One of the big things that the Neuse and the Pamlico River has been facing is excess nutrients. We think of nitrogen and phosphorus. We have it in our fertilizer. We stick it on our vegetables. It helps them grow. It's great. But when we get too much nitrogen and phosphorus in our waterways, it actually upsets the ecosystem and the balance. And that can fuel algal blooms and the fish kills and things like that. Back in the 90s, that was the key pollutants that they were really focused on. And everybody came together, municipal dischargers, wastewater dischargers, nonprofits, farmers, and they came up with a set of rules to try to reduce the amount of nitrogen pollution coming into the Neuse River. And the goal was to reduce it by 30%. They did all the fun sciencey models and said, if we reduce by 30%, then we think the Neuse River will get healthy again. We won't see the algal blooms and we won't see the fish kills. The long story short is we haven't met those goals over a 30-some year period. And in fact, more recently, we've actually seen everything going in the wrong direction. So unfortunately, not great news, but still, it's not that it's not fixable. And science is kind of pointing us in the direction of what we need to do. And again, this is just pictures of the Neuse Basin. Those little dots are some of the areas where they took some water samples. But this graph, here's my first big science graph. This one is kind of showing over time from the 1990s all the way up to about 2016 is the most recent graph that they put together at the state level. The green line is the one you want to focus on. There's different types of nitrogen. If you know chemistry at all, there's types of inorganic nitrogen and organic nitrogen. Inorganic nitrogen is usually found like in our wastewater. So when we flush the toilet, it goes to the wastewater treatment plant, it gets treated, but there's a discharge and there's some nitrogen in that. That's typically an inorganic type of nitrogen. From things from farms, detritus and things coming off the landscape from wetlands, agriculture, stormwater, that is typically an inorganic or an organic type of nitrogen. And that one is in the blue, right? The red is kind of wastewater treatment plant style nitrogen. The blue is more like farmland, runoff nitrogen coming from kind of an organic source. And the green in the middle is just total. If you were to put all of those together, total. So you see at the beginning, there was a big drop. There's a lot of effort put into this. The wastewater treatment plants did a lot to reduce the amount of nitrogen coming out of their wastewater plants. In fact, the Neuse River wastewater treatment plant operators are doing actually a pretty good job of reducing the amount of nitrogen. They're actually better in the Neuse than they are in the Tar-Pamlico, which is great. But you see around it was about 2000, right around 2000, you start to see that organic start to tick up. And basically overall, as you see, we kind of that green line never reached that 30% reduction target, which is the bottom line all the way across. And in fact, now we're to the point where we're almost above where we were from the baseline. So not only did we not meet the reduction that we said we had to do, we're actually above where we were in the 90s when there wasn't management stuff in place. So not a great picture. There's some, different reasons for that. Some of it's got to do with we have a lot more rain coming and shorter storms, so there's more runoff. We have more people in the watershed, so there's more flow, more wastewater. There was lots of changes in farming. We have more poultry. The amount of hogs that we produce in the Neuse River is about the same, but there's a lot more poultry operations, which bring in a lot more waste as well. So a couple different reasons there. But I think the key part is that it's the organic side, it's the non-point source, it's the farming, it's the development. Those are the things we really need to target if we're going to get those levels back. And this is just another way to look at the same data. Basically, on the right, if it's blue or green, it's adding, it's worse. If it's the red on the left, it means that the nitrogen actually levels have been better than what they were, which is what we want to see. So in the upper watershed, like Clayton and some others are doing okay. But if you'll notice at the bottom, I put this one in here because the Trent River is the bottom one. I don't know how well you can see it, but it never reduced anything. The Trent River is actually worse for inorganic nitrogen, worse for organic nitrogen, and worse for total nitrogen. So something is going on in the Trent River that requires a little bit more digging. And so why does this matter? Why does this matter? All of those nutrients coming down again fuel these algal blooms. And these are a picture of the Neuse estuary. So if you ever look at a photo, a satellite photo, how the Neuse kind of has that crook. This is the Neuse estuary. So from the upper point, that's New Bern, all the way down before it dumps into the Sound on the right side of that U. And if it's in green, if it's in yellow, if it's in red, that's just showing the science behind those are high chlorophyll A levels, meaning there's algal blooms, there's impacts of nutrients. That's the same. And this is just over time. The upper left, I think, is 2001 to 2005. And then the upper right is 2005 to 10. And then it goes from 10 to 15 and then 15 to 20. So 2020 is the most recent one that they have. And essentially the impairment is always there. The river is always impaired for nutrients. It just kind of moves down. If it's a really wet year, we have a lot of flow coming from downstream. That impairment moves towards the estuary. Kind of a lot of fresh water comes in. You start to see the impact of the algal blooms closer to the estuary, or to the Sound. During a dry year, when there's less water coming in, from upstream, that impairment's closer to New Bern and Fairfield Harbor. I feel like it's been a little dry in this past year. So if we start to see problems this summer, it's going to be New Bern kind of the middle of that U that we see. That was a lot of science. We will take some questions here, but just really quickly, I wanted to go through about how do we address this as an organization. We monitor from the air. So Samantha's actually in an airplane on that one. She's on the ground in that picture. We investigate out in the field. We take water samples. We collaborate with university researchers to help them get samples, to help answer their questions, for them to answer ours. We love to educate. Emily, who would have been here tonight, is great at working with kids to have them kind of connected with this work. And we advocate at the legislature. We advocate in front of public hearings. We work with local residents to make sure they understand how they can be civically involved in decision-making at the local level. And a couple of our programs, you heard from Clay, some of the neat programs that we do. We try to walk the walk when it comes to stormwater management. When you think about rain coming on the landscape and it goes somewhere, we don't think about it much, but if it hits a parking lot, hits other things, goes to a storm drain, that goes right to a creek. And so what we try to do is interrupt that. We interrupt that by building rain gardens, by building creative wetlands, by capturing it in cisterns. We have a big cistern right across over here at Epiphany. If you go around the backside, you see these huge cisterns, and they're capturing most of the rainwater coming off of those roofs, and then they can use that to irrigate their ball fields. And so it's reused as well. And then this picture, the bottom left is actually a creative wetland that we built at East Carolina University. But it's a great educational tool. Everyone has a nice big sign explaining what's going on, why it was done, and what that means for water quality. The other one is plastic pollution. This is a whole nother topic that at some point we could dig into just on its own. But about 95% of the trash that researchers and we are seeing on the rivers is plastic. So when trash gets into the river, either being dumped, blowing out of trucks, coming down storm drains, by accident or on purpose, is mostly plastic, which includes styrofoam and other things. So we have started a project to actually try to stop it at the urban source. So we've installed trash traps. The bottom right is a picture. We have one here in the Duffyfield Canal. We've got them in Washington, Kinston, Greenville, Raleigh. We're actually going to expand in Raleigh. So we're trying to catch the trash at the source, and it's a great way for volunteers to get in the creek. They help clean out the trash trap. They have a good time, and so that's one of our volunteer programs. Swim guide is another one that's coming up. If you have some time on Thursday mornings this summer, Emily would love to hear from you. It's very simple. You take a water sample, they bring it here to the lab. We process it for bacteria. We let the whole world know through our partnership with Public Radio East and WITN and others about what we found. And so it's meant to really inform folks that might be swimming on the river, kayaking, recreating, fishing over the weekends during the summer. Is the water in your area clean or not? Does it have high bacteria that could be harmful to you, kids, pets, or is it not? It's a great program. We rely on volunteers. We still have some needs here. So again, it's a Thursday morning program during the summer. And it's very simple to do. They're great at training volunteers. So that's another way to plug in. This one I'm actually quite proud about. We have actually started a podcast, Sound Rivers podcast. We had our first episode come out this past week about a long saga that we had with Blunt's Creek, trying to protect Blunt's Creek in Beaufort County. So every month we're going to have a news story, and you can find it Spotify, Amazon Music, on our website. And it's usually 20, 30 minutes. So if you're driving somewhere and you want to learn a little bit or hear some stories about the work that we do and some of our partners, this will be a neat thing to kind of plug in with. And I'll just end with a couple of things. You know, we talked about ways you can be involved, swim guide, the litter-free river, some cleanups. The other thing is just being eyes and ears, you know, having someone call into the office and say, I saw this, or I'm worried about this pollution. This doesn't seem right. I'm seeing dead fish. Just having those reports coming in are very helpful. We're a team of 9 over a huge area, and we rely on people letting us know what they're seeing, what they're concerned about. Share and educate with others as you learn. You know, talk to your neighbors. Tell them about what you learned and try to get them involved. And make sure we become a voter, an educated voter, and do everything you can there as well. Lastly, I'll just mention we're a nonprofit. We rely on donations and grants to keep us going and kind of carry the work forward that we do. We actually have a matching campaign this April. So if you're ever inclined to donate or join, this is just the time of year that's really good. We have some donors, including from here in New Bern, that are matching all gifts up to $30,000 for the month of April. So it is an important way for us to be able to fundraise to help, do the work to pay for the pollution investigations and the flights and things that we do. Okay, questions that you might have? Yeah.
Is this working?
Don't hear it. I can hear it when you pound on it a little bit, but I can repeat your question if you want to ask it.
Hello?
Yeah.
No.
Please wait for the microphone. Yeah. I'm sorry.
I know about hog farms, but could you tell me, where does the chicken poop go?
Good question. Okay. So it sounds like you all know the process of hog farms. It's a liquid waste. It's in lagoons. It's then sprayed out. So most of the poultry operations, it's a dry litter. In other words, there's the big barns. Each barn holds about 28 to 32,000 birds in each barn. So when you see those facilities that have 4, 6, 8, 12 barns, you can do the math. And about every 6 to 8 weeks, they rotate them through. They grow them, ship them off, slaughter them, get a new group in. But what they do is about a couple times a year, they'll actually push out all of that litter. So it's a mix of hay and bedding and poop. And so about twice a year, they'll push that out into big piles, and then it's land applied. Basically, it's just spread out on the land like you would with sludge or other things. It's not monitored. So we don't really know how much. So there's no regulations to know exactly how much or where it goes. They don't track that. And so some of our monitoring that we do for bacteria gives us a clue if we start to see spikes in bacteria. We also have a way now to do DNA testing. It's fascinating in the way science has evolved. We can take a sample, send it to a lab, and they can come back and say with certainty, fairly certain, is it human? Did it come from a human waste? Did it come from a bird? Did it come from a hog? And so that can be helpful too, where we can start to track sources. In fact, recently we had a problem where we were seeing really high bacteria levels near Kinston. And the team kept going out and seeing samples, and they found a sewer. There was basically a sewer pipe that had broken that was coming out through a stormwater pipe into the Neuse River, right near where people were swimming. And so they talked to the city of Kinston, and the city started to work to find and dig, and they finally found where the cross connection was and the broken pipe was, fixed it, and now the water quality, is coming back normal. So they're really great tools to have, and so science has really been helpful. But yeah, poultry it's a drier waste. But it's basically land applied in the same way you would swine waste.
In the beginning, when you showed the watershed and the river basins, what determines the size of those?
It's topography, basically. Let me go back. So here, here's a kind of an aerial image. Basically, what they can do is figure out through topography and everything else and through where all of the tributaries and streams go. If it's outside of that line on the north, it's going to drain northward towards the Tar-Pamlico. So through a stream to the Tar-Pamlico. And on the south, it would go probably towards the Cape Fear, or if you get closer to the coast, maybe the White Oak. So it's really basically, they can do that now to pretty good certainty, both from topographical kind of information and where all of the little tributaries are. In the coastal plain, it gets a little tougher because we've ditched everything, right? And so sometimes a little hard to figure out, this ditch, probably that water probably used to go to the Neuse, maybe now it goes somewhere else. But they're pretty good at having the watersheds kind of dialed in exactly, on which side water drains to which river basin.
This is just a statement, but if they have that many chickens, why is it only a couple times a year? It should be every couple of months.
Yeah. I'm not really sure about the process or the why behind. They do a couple things. Sometimes they do what's called a cake out, where they just scrape off the top, which is mostly the poo and stuff, and they leave some of the bedding at the bottom. And sometimes they'll do a full clean out where they take everything out and land apply it. I think the big thing is North Carolina is like the top 2 producer of chickens and poultry in the country. So it's a lot of animals, a lot of waste, predominantly east of 95, especially for swine. There's some poultry, out in the Yadkin and other, closer to Winston-Salem. But I would say, I think in North Carolina, Pitt and Edgecombe are some of the highest producing poultry counties, which share borders with the Neuse. That's Pitt, that's the Tar-Pam and the Neuse. And swine, I think for us, Wayne, Johnston County is where a lot of the swine are. Actually, even a little bit more than Lenore. And then the Cape Fear has got the biggest concentration of swine, really anywhere on the planet there. So, yeah.
But one thing about the chickens is they don't have to tell you where the chicken farms are. They kind of hide them sometimes. That's one thing.
They're deemed permitted by regulation, whereas the swine farms all have a permit. So we know where they are, we know how many animals they are, we know where they land apply their waste, and we have annual reports about how much waste. With poultry, we have none of that. So the way that we figure out where they are is through flights and aerial imagery.
Nitrogen pollution. What about the runoff from everybody's home where they're putting fertilizer on their lawns?
Yeah, it's a source too. From the science that we've seen, I don't know how much they're able to parse out, the impact of kind of homeowner nutrient management versus just total developed area, which can come from, golf courses and, all of these things. It's certainly an issue. We want to make sure that people are being very educated about applying anything. And if they do apply anything, making sure it's the right amount at the right time. Don't do it right before a rainstorm, because you just basically, have you ever seen the cool little graphic where there's a guy doing the little fertilizer cart that has the spinny thing on, and he's just standing over water and he's fertilizing the water? It's a good image to say, when we do that, we're kind of just fertilizing the river. So I think, there's different management. We're not really good there, but I think the North Carolina Wildlife Federation has some great resources for homeowners about native plants, about, even things like changing grass to clover grass and other things that can, it doesn't really require us to having nitrogen or other things to have green lawns and things like that. So I think there's a lot of different things that homeowners can do through education to help reduce their footprint as best as they can. Septic is another one. We're finding more and more impacts from septic tanks that are probably not functioning well. And we found data, Village of Simpson, we've seen this, we've seen it in Craven County, just near Havelock. Some of that may be in areas where there's low income or folks that may have septic tanks that just aren't operating well. They don't have the funds to kind of get them repaired or fixed. And there's really no funding source out there from a county or government to help folks with that. We're working on that with some folks now, but maintaining, if you have a septic, making sure that it's maintained, it's pumped out regularly. And there's resources that we can help provide in some on Environmental Protection Agency website too. But I think, yeah, it's a good point. We all play a role in trying to reduce our footprint as well. But I think overall nutrient management from development is starting to grow because the area is just growing. We're having, more and more people, but it doesn't seem to offset the amount of we're getting from a loading standpoint from wastewater discharge and from big agriculture, like big animal agriculture. Good question, though.
I was out in Durham a couple of weeks ago, and they said at a restaurant they're getting some wonderful oysters from the Topsail area and from the Beaufort area. Is there good potential for more oyster bed growth in our area?
Yeah, I don't know about this far because I'm the North Carolina Coastal Federation is the one that has done a lot of work in Eastern North Carolina related to growing of oysters, and they're working with oyster farmers and things now. So I would encourage you to look, on their website. It's nccoast.org. I think when you get closer up here, there's so much fresh water that, they may survive, that they're not going to grow like they would as you get a little bit further towards the coast and have a higher salinity level, which is what oysters really want. But there has been a huge concerted effort. There's been money spent, but there's been a lot of grant money that's come in to create more oyster beds, which is great because they're filter feeders, right? They can filter a lot of water. They filter out a lot of things. And I think our job then is to make it so it's a good economy, right? We have oysters that are growing, that are filtering things out, that are also safe to eat as well. And that's an important part. But yeah, North Carolina Coastal Federation has been the nonprofit driving a lot of in fact, they have a huge one at the end of the Neuse River right before it dumps into the Pamlico Sound. They started one there a couple years ago.
Anybody here?
Yeah, related. It's on. Oh, okay. Sorry. Related to filter feeders, can they concentrate pollutants in their flesh because they are filter feeders?
Probably, but I am not the right one to answer that question. We get a lot of questions like that, especially like if there's a fish kill, we encourage people obviously don't eat the fish, probably best not to recreate there. Because we don't necessarily know exactly why the fish are dying. It could be oxygen. It could be a microcystin, which is the chemical that's produced from harmful algal blooms. And those can be toxic to especially pets. They're more dangerous. If your dog goes out and drinks some of that water, they're going to be the canary in the coal mine in that scenario and get sick first. And we don't have a great way to test for harmful algal bloom microcystin toxins. I think we're working on that and the state's working on that, but I'll have to do a little research and get back to Michael with anything I can find about that. Because I'm not sure.
From the mountains to the coast, is there any companies pumping in chemicals into the waters?
Yeah. Everywhere.
PFAS.
Yeah. So you may have heard like the Chemours company down in Wilmington, which is like a DuPont. They do Teflon type style. They have a chemical called perfluorinated. It's a perfluorinated compound, which is, you might hear the word PFAS or PFOA. They're called forever chemicals now. We've kind of named them forever chemicals because they don't really break down. Once they're out in the environment, they're just there. And so this facility in particular in the Cape Fear River has been dumping, PFAS out of their wastewater discharge for a long time. That has contaminated people's well water and drinking water supply. We have tested for that type of chemical in the Neuse and Tar-Pam. We have found it, which is not shocking because it literally is everywhere on the planet now. But we haven't found it at very high levels. So some feeling of, okay, we have it, but it's not, at the level like we're seeing in the Cape Fear that people are really worried about for health. It's a problem that needs to be addressed. I was just talking to someone else. The EPA did come out with some rules last week to try to regulate the amount that can be found in drinking water. We're still trying to understand exactly what those rules mean and what's going to happen next, and what that means for like a Newbern drinking water supply and other places. But the way our permitting system works is you can have an industry, you're manufacturing something, you can have a discharge of all different types of chemicals, right, and contaminants. There's modeling that they do to try to determine, well, they can discharge this amount and we think it won't be harmful to the aquatic environment and we think it won't be harmful to people. I don't know how well they've done a good job of thinking like, well, if you put this discharger into context with this one and the next one down and the next one down and the next one down of that cumulative impact, right? I will also say the other thing, if you talk to your legislators, you need to tell them they need to fully fund the Department of Environmental Quality in the state. They don't have enough people. They don't have enough manpower. They are behind there. Many of the industrial and wastewater dischargers are operating under expired permits because they don't have the staff to do to go through and do the permit renewals and do all of that stuff. So yeah, it's kind of compounding. We can't have healthy, clean waters if we don't have a regulatory and permitting agency that is able to do their job. It's called the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality.
DEQ.
Yep, DEQ, and the thing to your state legislator, your senator, state senator, representative is clean water is important to me. Having trust that you all are regulating the environment is important to me. The only way to do that is if you fully fund this agency and step away politically from dealing, getting in there. But fully funding is the key one. Yeah.
Wait.
Get a chance to say.
I'm a little concerned about the Supreme Court decision and the legislative decision and how our legislators can ignore what is in our Constitution and pass a law that goes against that. And so I was wondering what you and your other advocates for clean water and for wetlands, is there a group that's going to be monitoring what's going to be happening with the wetlands so that we can have some data to go to the legislature again? I mean, you're obviously understaffed all over. And so I was just wondering what you're going to do about that. And I would assume that you get some funding through grants and things maybe from the state. And are those still forthcoming, or are they?
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of concerns I have.
Sure. I'll answer the second one first. So related to funding, we have different grants that come from private and, state or pass through federal dollars. They're all project specific grants. So it's not like we just get funding to do our work. We say we're going to go do stormwater reports for 12 school campuses in Nash County, and we get grants to do that. So we do get a combination of state and private grants, like the Bosch Community Fund. The Bosch company here helps to fund our campus stormwater work in Craven County. And so it's an important part of our revenue for this year. For example, it's about half of our revenue that we have that comes in to help pay for the work that we do. Your first question, there's everyone in the environmental world in North Carolina is thinking about this and trying to work together to help figure out how do we get the legislature to undo something they did, which is not easy. I think there's a few in the legislature on both sides of the aisle that realize that that was probably a mistake to do, and they're understanding that, but getting the rest of them to get there and to say, nope, we were wrong. We need to bring back protections. When they have developers and others in their ears saying, no, don't do that. We don't want regulations. We want to just be able to build, and not have to deal with these regulations. It's going to be a tough slog. We're not going to get them back in this legislative session. It's going to take some time. I think more storms, more impacts, more flooding. They're going to get more, people in their ear from these communities that are having these impacts. And that coupled with the work that we're trying to do to give them the real information. I'll be frank, the problem that we're having is that the Home Builders Association is a powerful lobby in North Carolina. And they have gotten their talking points out there about what the history of wetland regulation was in the state, and it's all virtually untrue. And we can show them, point by point, how what they're saying is untrue, and that's not fact. But we're not messengers right now that are being listened to. That's why we need community members to do it. We need hunters and fishers and others to do that. Unfortunately, it's been hard for environmental groups to be a trusted messenger for the legislative folks that are in power right now. And so we're trying to educate as many as we can and get folks to provide that message back to their representatives. Again, I think Senator Perry, he gets it. He understands and he knows the importance of wetlands. And the Farm Act was one of those ones that had all kinds of good stuff in it for farmers. And then, of course, this provision to undo. And so, it gets hard for those guys when they're trying to decide, do I vote on something with all this good and this bad? But it's a big problem, and it's going to be for us. Sound River is a big focus of the work we do coming forward. It's going to be hard to monitor the impact of it because you can have this development or expansion at Fairfield or all these others that are going to be now developing in places that they probably wouldn't have before, and they are now. But it's going to be so piecemeal. We're trying to focus in on zoning hearings and others just piece by piece to get some examples of that. But time will tell. But it's an important fight. It's an important fight.
My question was, I'm not sure what you call the different departments in North Carolina, but you said the environmental quality. Then is there a Department of Agriculture here as well? Now, do the two work together as in partners, or do they work in separate worlds with separate goals?
Probably more the latter has been my experience. There's been times when there's some collaboration that goes on. For example, right now there's the bird flu. Have you kind of seen some? There's a type of flu that usually impacts wild birds and has gotten into poultry and things over the years. It's getting into other mammals. In fact, I think the New York Times just had a really good story about this. It's now getting into dairy cattle, and it's actually infecting dairy cattle in North Carolina. And when these types of diseases show up in the agricultural world, they and emergency management, DQ, they all work pretty well together to deal with those types of emergencies. Outside of that, there's not a lot of, I think, cross kind of collaboration or work between that agency and the Department of Agriculture. It's different leaders. The Department of Agriculture is led by the commissioner, Troxler. I can't think of Troxler, Steve Troxler, and he's voted on by the body in North Carolina. And so he kind of runs the Department of Agriculture, whereas the Department of Environmental Quality is under the governor. And so he puts leaders and things up and is under that executive branch. So, you have a Republican on one, a Democrat on the other. And in this world right now, for some reason, a lot of them aren't working together very well.
Hey, production agriculture, as you mentioned, is likely the largest primary source of nutrient loading in the river. And a hard question for you is why at this point don't we have harder data on those sources and then turn that back into your petitioning efforts?
There's actually some pretty good modeling and data that's been done by NC State. They've actually have an interesting technique where they can fluoresce types of organic nitrogen. I won't get into the science too much because I don't fully understand it either. But they can then source track the organic nitrogen like we do with bacteria back to particular sources. So the data and information is out there, and there's good estimates about waste load allocations, about how much nitrogen is coming from. We know exactly what's coming from municipalities because it's coming out of a pipe, and they have to monitor that. It's the non-point source that's a little bit harder because it might be on the landscape, it might run off. Sometimes that science is, say you have a hog farm, they spray their nitrogen and their waste on a field, but then between the field and the stream, there might be an area, a patch of woods or a little patch of wetlands. When that nitrogen comes through, it actually might pick up the signature then of the wetland. And when it gets discharged into the stream, the science is saying, well, this is nitrogen coming from the wetland. It actually originated from the swine farm, but the way that it transforms, it's just a harder process to source track that back. But I do think the data is there. It's the political will to make the change to solve the problem.
But also from the hog farm, since they don't require groundwater monitoring, is that the groundwater reaches the stream at some point, and most of the root zone does not capture a lot of that nutrient because they make corn with it, and it only has about an 8-inch root zone of capture. But I'm concerned about the regular production agriculture outside of hog farms.
Right.
That is the primary. You look at the land mass and use of farming practices, that runoff is significant. Look at the red tide in the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, the Gulf down south. And
Yep.
I mean, to me, that's your big
I'm bringing.
writing on the wall in terms of nutrient loading in the Neuse River Basin.
Yeah. Can you share my screen again? Oh, you got it up there. So when we put those rules in back in the late 90s and 2000, we had rules to try to reduce nitrogen from development, from agriculture, from municipal wastewater. So this graph is actually, they set a 30% reduction also from row crop agriculture in both the Neuse and the Tar-Pam. On paper, it's not, there's no water sampling that happens on this. This is basically what crops are they doing? How much fertilizer are they applying to this crop? Have they put in cover crops? Have they put in different types of management that are supposed to reduce nitrogen? So it's all calculated on paper. Both in the Neuse and the Tar-Pam, the agriculture, row crop agriculture has met the loading reduction. So they would tell you that they've done their part. And the data from the science that the regulators have is saying that. It's not, again, it's not perfect because we're not taking water samples out there. But so that's not a perfect answer, but it is kind of tracked. And these are reports that they do then every year to update from a year to year.
There are nitrogen sensing electrode systems that can convey information through the satellite systems
Yeah.
continuously.
Yeah.
Very easy to set up, and you can get direct reads. I'm just surprised that after this long, we don't have more quantitative data on the sources. Even though
Yeah.
it's non-point source.
Yeah. I'll have to look more into that. We may have more than I'm familiar with. I've been in the administrative hat now for 7 years, so I'm not as into the science as I used to be. I do think that NC State and some others have done quite a bit of research, but from a management perspective, so what the state can do through the rules that they have, this is usually what they use from row crop agriculture, is this sort of on-paper reduction. Because, for example, corn uses more fertilizer than cotton. So in years that they grow more cotton, they're saying, well, there's less nitrogen runoff because they're growing cotton as of corn. If they grow soy, it's a fixer. So they're thinking there's even less nitrogen that's coming off. So it's all of that, like what types of crops, what's the fertilizer rate that the local ag guys are recommending for this year. So it's like this huge spreadsheet that they spit in all this data points every year, and it spits out this graph is kind of how they got it. So that's kind of the weird sausage making that I don't fully understand either.
Well, I understand that you get your funds from grants and from donations.
That's correct.
And so we have something for you from the Carolina Nature Coalition.
Great.
I couldn't do a big check. You know how they usually do a big check? So because of the work that you do, and because we always support you, we are going to give you a donation of $100 from the Carolina Nature Coalition, which is really a donation from all of you because we only live on donations. So if you support what we're doing and what they're doing, there's a donation bucket over there. And, you know, we do not get grants, but we do get donations. So we appreciate it. And the other thing is our next presentation will be on the Duffy Field Stormwater Project. They got another $4 million to, so there's a stormwater project going through Duffy Field, and the city stormwater supervisor will be talking about it. That's Avery Smith. He will be coming next month and talk about it. So I hope you all will be here. That's another going to be good, how to deal with the stormwater in Craven County.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. All right. Can you see it?
But the other thing I would say, if you're interested in getting info, yeah, if you're interested in, I'm trying to use my dad's Methodist voice. If you're interested in getting information from us, we have a great e-news that just goes out once a week on a Thursday. And the back table over there, you can put your email address down. We can add that in. And then you can get, information on what we're up to, what information we're seeing, upcoming opportunities or events. So feel free to do that. And I appreciate, you've been great, lots of great questions. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, there's a sign-up sheet over there for them. And then the donation is over there. There's also a donation button on our website. So please, that's what supports us. Thank you all.